All right. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation again, Peter. It's delighted to be here with you and have conversation with many of you yesterday, getting to know you a little better, hearing your stories. And that's kind of what I want to get into today. So yesterday we began a reflection on a most intriguing story in the Hebrew Bible. It's what happened after the prophetic showdown on Mount Carmel, where Elijah, laid out the sacrifice, and God rained down fire and consumed that sacrifice. And then the tragic events that followed, where he was instructed to slay hundreds of prophets. Boy, that's a lot to unpack right there. So we'll just kind of put a pin in that. But what happened after is what I find most intriguing, is that I guess word gets back to Jezebel, and Jezebel vows to take his life. And considering all that happened on Mount Carmel, it's very strange to see Elijah respond the way that he did. And he hightailed it out of there for fear of his life. He was afraid that Jezebel was going to take his life. And so he ran, and he ran, and he ran, and he ran, and he ran for 40 days at least. There was a little bit of a in-between time there, but he ran for 40 days, 40 nights, and he came to the mountain of God, Mount Horeb. And evidently Elijah, when asked by God, "What are you doing here? Why are you here?" Elijah responded, "I have been zealous for you, Lord. I have done the work, the prophetic work that you've asked me to do. I have spoken truth to power. And look where it's gotten me. Lord, I feel all alone." He says, "I alone am left." And he says it twice. But God reminded this man of God that he was in fact not alone. That there were 7,000 he had reserved who had not bowed the knee to Baal. And so yesterday, from this story, the main lesson that I was trying to convey was that my hope was to encourage you in all the work that you do as an Adventist human subject researcher, to remind you that you are not alone and that your work matters as well. For it too is a kind of prophetic work. Being involved in human subject research is prophetic in that our task is to expose the truth about reality, about what's really going on, not what we think or want to be going on, or not even really what we think ought to be going on, at least not yet. The initial task is to uncover what's really going on. And as it pertains to the theme of our conference here, it's making the connection of that data to the life of the church. What's really going on in the church. So that's one lesson that I wanted to share with you out of this intriguing story. But there's another lesson too. Another lesson contained in this story that I think is particularly relevant for us as Adventist human subject researchers. So I'd like to consider once again this passage, not the entire passage, but just the first 8 verses this time. So I don't have any fancy slides here. I told you about my whole computer debacle yesterday. But if you have your Bible with you, which we all do, we carry in our pocket now, feel free to follow along. I'd like to just read the first 8 verses of this account, 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings 19. And I'll read beginning here with verse 1. 1 Kings 19 and verse 1. Now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and even more, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow at this time." And Elijah was afraid and arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, "It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers." He lay down and slept under a juniper tree. And behold, there was an angel touching him and said to him, "Arise, eat." Verse 6. Then he looked, and behold, there was at his head a bread cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you." And then finally, verse 8. So he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. The second lesson that I want to relate to you here as we reflect on this story is that not only is your work as an Adventist human subject researcher important, not only to God and to the church, but you as the researcher, as a person, as a human being, matter to God. Who you are and your story of what brings you to this work as a researcher also matters. You know, this narrative that we just read, it is filled with pathos, with emotion, isn't it? I mean, you just kind of feel it as you get into this story. It's also filled with compassionate attention of God to Elijah as a person, as a man, as a human being. God wasn't just concerned about the prophetic work that he had called Elijah to. No, he cared for him as a human being. He sent an angel twice to minister to his physical needs, and then later reminded him that he wasn't alone to address his spiritual and emotional needs. To me, this indicates that Elijah's story was equally important and could not be separated from his prophetic work, that these two go hand in hand. Similarly, what we bring as a researcher to the tasks of uncovering what's really going on in the church is extremely important and must also not be separated. So yesterday, when I was talking to many of you, even though we all are studying, engaged in human subject research, there are a lot of different ways of doing that. And I think we have, represented here those who, engage more in the sort of quantitative side of research and those who engage in the qualitative side. I think ultimately the mixed methods is really going to yield the best results. I'm more of a qualitative guy. The quantitative is important and I value it, but I'm not very good with numbers. So I'm going to leave it to the statisticians and those who are very good with that. But in qualitative research, we have a very interesting concept here that I think is very important and is relevant for what I'm talking about here. It's called reflexivity. Reflexivity is the process of examining how a researcher's personal background, beliefs, and biases can influence the research process and procedures. It involves actively questioning one's own assumptions as a researcher and acknowledging the subjective role of the researcher in shaping the data collected and interpreted. So by giving proper attention to this reflexive dynamic, the qualitative researcher enhances credibility, ensures ethical practices, and increases the trustworthiness of the findings. The truth is, all research projects, whether they are quantitative or qualitative, necessarily intersects with human biography in one form or another, does it not? And if this is the case, then it makes sense to be aware of our own story as researchers and how that influences and is influenced by our research subjects. In this account, we see that it was Elijah's personhood and humanity that got him into a desperate situation where he felt alone and even wanted to die. However, it was by compassionately ministering to Elijah's human condition that God helped him get out of it. Elijah's story was equally important and could not be separated from his prophetic work. So I ask you a question. What is your human subject researcher story? How did you get to this place where you'd even want to attend a conference like this? When you were graduating high school, I doubt you looked into the future and said, man, human subject research, that's my jam. Right? What led you to this place? What is the backstory? What is your origin story that brings you to this place? You know, maybe there was a moment, maybe there was an event, an experience. Maybe obviously it's probably a cluster of things, right? That sort of one leads to the other. You know, I think that this might even be a really interesting conversation piece as we sit around the table, share a meal, chat between presentations. So maybe take a moment to just pause and think, is there one thing that stands out that led me to this place? What are we doing on time here? I want to honor the time, make sure our keynote here has plenty of time to present. Let me just share maybe one moment from my own life. Since the theme here is connecting the data with the life of the church, I thought, well, maybe I could share a very significant moment to me that was kind of a turning point in my thinking that I think, you know, there were other things that came prior to this, but this was a very important moment as a pastor. When I was a pastor here in the South, I'm not going to tell you exactly where, but it was in the South. And this experience really got me thinking, you know, that there's more to the story. There's more than meets the eye. And there's always more than meets the eye when you're a pastor in a church. So I started out in ministry as a youth pastor. I was an associate pastor of a larger church. And my conference president, he decided it was time to let me loose on my own, and he wanted to put me out in a district. We called them a district, and so there's several churches that are clustered together, separated by quite a distance. There was one church of the three that was larger, and I ended up spending a little more of my attention, at least up front with this church. But you have to know something about this district. This district actually was proud of this reputation that they had. And that reputation was that they were known for chewing pastors up and spitting them out. And when I shared this with my president, he said, yes, I'm aware of this reputation. And I said, so this is kind of like the Frank Sinatra song, if I can make it there, I can make it anywhere, right? He's like, yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm like, okay, well, let's do it. So my wife and I are young and eager and interested and excited, wanted to throw ourselves in this work. And we got out there, and man, I got so many stories I could tell from my time serving in this district. But I really, I preached my heart out, spent a lot of time crafting those sermons and really trying to get to know people, and things seemed to be going pretty well. There's always that honeymoon period. But one of the things that the church leadership, the church board wanted me to address and to help them do was the last thing that you want to do as a new pastor in a church. Doesn't matter if you're young and naive and inexperienced, even if you're an older pastor and you come to a new district, this is the last thing that you want to do. At least that's what my seminary professors told me. And that is mess with the worship service. For some church members, the worship service, it is sacred. It is like you move the order of the service, one item out of order. It is like I just eradicated the 10 Commandments or something. But that's what they wanted to do. Why did they want to do that? Well, they thought that when you change the worship service, that's going to bring more people, right? you add a worship team and maybe a different music, and you do all this stuff to the service, and the people are just gonna flood through the doors now. They had a younger pastor, and I was energetic, and he's always gesticulating and doing these things. And he thought, oh, this is great. We're gonna have lots of people come to our church. They in many ways, they were a lovely church. They're very friendly. I think in some ways, for many reasons, I think it was a fairly healthy church. But there was obviously more underneath the surface because they had this reputation, right? Well, I did the best I could to try to address that, and worked with them, and we did all kinds of things to really get that service going. And the people didn't come. They thought when you changed the worship service that now all these people are going to flood into the church. And some months went by, and we were in board meeting, and something just kind of came up that they just mentioned. They said, so-and-so was kind of complaining about not having a place to park. And I recall, seeing the parking lot, that they had this huge piece of grass there that it was almost like they kind of teed it up for another parking lot, to extend the parking lot out further. And I said, well, why don't we just expand our parking lot? It sounds like there's some people that want to come, but they don't have a place to park. And they said, every pastor that's come here has mentioned that, but we just can't seem to bring it to the finish line. Well, I'm young, I'm naive, I'm thinking, what's the problem? Let's get a couple bids, and we have the money, right? And that's what we did. And within a matter of like a month, we actually extended our parking lot. And you know what? Overnight, our church attendance doubled. And we sustained it all the way over months and months and months that I was there. And as I look back on that experience, I got to thinking, man, if I really had those sort of social science tools, I could have really investigated, and I think I would have realized that it wasn't a straight line from change church service and the worship service and add new instruments and a worship team. That's not a straight line, right? It's not causal necessarily that all of a sudden you're going to end up with more people. Sometimes it's the things that you don't even realize. But I had not developed any thick description at all of what was really going on. The issue was not the worship service, because it turns out you can have a lot of different kinds of worship services and still have a very healthy, thriving church, right? It doesn't have to look just a certain way. I think it's about being authentic to who you are. And so when I went to my next church district after that, I started to employ something called natural church development in the way that I was doing ministry, which is really bringing sort of a scientific approach to understanding the health of the church. And there's a whole program involved in that. You can talk to Peter if you want. He is the NCD guy, natural church development guy in the North American division. But that was a very significant moment in my life because I realized so many things. But the one thing that really stood out was how important even pastors need to understand their story, what they're bringing to, we all have our blind spots, right? I bought into the narrative as well that somehow we changed the service, and I was very confident of my preaching ability. It turns out it really wasn't about my preaching. And it really wasn't about the worship service. People just needed a place to park. They already had a lot of things going on, and people wanted to come. They just didn't have a place to park. And I was proud to tell my conference president at the end of my time there that we doubled the church attendance. We went from 15 to 30. No, it's more like 50 to 100. But so what is your human subject research story? How did you get to this place? I invite you to reflect on that. Let us close together. Father divine, we thank you for your word, our rule of faith. We are grateful for the stories of old that point us to you and reveal reality from your perspective. And you have encouraged us through the life and prophetic ministry of Elijah, a human being just like us, one prone to discouragement, to loneliness, to questioning even his own calling. Yet through the lessons learned, you've reminded us that not only does our work as Adventist human subject researchers matter to you and to the church, but that who we are and what we bring to our research matters to you as well. May our story more faithfully advance your story in these last days of Earth's history. Come quickly, Lord Jesus. Amen.